a African American daughter. She needs role models. She needs to know the history of the struggles of African American women, and to know that Phyllis Wheatley was a member of this church, which she's a member of this church, to know that she can overcome various obstacles and hurdles in her life means a lot to me when I'm talking to my daughter about strong black
When you
women.
think about things being born, you most likely think humans. But this is a story about one slave woman's heartfelt beliefs that helped build and birth our literary system. Phyllis Wheatley always started out bright. However, when she was younger, she was kidnapped from West Africa, her native Senegal. She was then sold to a Taylor family at 7, meant as a personal servant to Susanna in 1761. One of her most horrid times remembering would be the rags she was given for clothes, and often how many slaves died on the boat. If they didn't before landing, some would throw themselves overboard to save themselves from the misery. They first noticed her curiosity, and then her wonder, and they had to encourage it. She was welcomed and named Phyllis after the boat they were traveling on. Phyllis means foliage. She was taught to read and write the first 16 months and studied various writers like Alexander Pope and John Milton. But it was truly her curiosity that led her to write. They originally taught her Christianity and English. She even memorized the Bible. Her knowledge was coming even uncommon for a young white boy. Impressed by her poetry and literature skills, they taught her ancient history and more, such as Latin, mythology, and her soon-to-be passion, classical literature. Mary and Nathaniel, the Wheatley's children, specialized in teaching her to read biology and astronomy. She started off as entertainment for guests. She was known as very eloquent with her words. When she was 12, she was already writing poems, and by the time she was around the age of 14, she had already published them. Later on, she wrote a book called Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. On January 24th, 1774, the ads for her book publishing date went up in the Boston Gazette. News of her talent spread, and the book sold amazing, nearly 300 copies. Jackpot for those times, especially black people. But her past definitely influenced her future because one of her first poems was of two men drowning to save themselves. She was called African Genius from Boston and Mother of Black Literature. The poem was published and debuted in the Mercury Town newspaper, one being brought from Africa to America. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. Sadly, she did not gain her freedom until after she had published a book in London. Her publication not only made her the first African American slave, but also woman. 1775, she became a household name in her town as well as England when she wrote a poem honoring George Washington's leadership in the Revolutionary War. She was granted to meet him as president a year later and had the whole nation awe with her words. But some people were stunned and thought someone who was a slave wouldn't admire someone with them. To promote her work, she would travel to England. She spoke about liberty and religious freedom for her and others while being a slave. She even wrote philosophical letters to demonstrate her knowledge after speaking out for what she believed in. She got to meet with many other leaders like Benjamin Franklin, and this had the people surprised because to them she was only a black woman, but she was making an impact. However, Thomas Jefferson was not the biggest fan. He would criticize her and diminish her abilities. The idea was that African people were intellectually inferior was just a justification for slavery, and founding fathers needed a reason for liberty to be for all, while in realization it wasn't. Yet, here is Phyllis, fighting for what she believed in, and this made her very existence dangerous, because she was there using her logic to justify that the purpose of all people being able to live freely was not the stable and right foundation to live on when they knew it was a lie. And now, moment of truth. This was big for her. Game set and won. She had used their thinking to justify hers, and now she had many on her side. She had showed them how blacks were just as equally capable and who benefited more from education, and this is eventually what helped spark the abolition movement.
Fellas went far, and she even had famous people fighting for her because she did write those poems, but nobody wanted to believe it. People that would examine her to make sure that these were her writings. And so she was tested. I mean, obviously they didn't believe her. They're not smart enough to do that kind of stuff. Well, no. How did she know how to write poetry? Somebody else had to write this. But she proved them wrong.
Learn, and she managed to make history in doing so. During a time where the average black person in America was killed for wanting to learn to read, Phyllis Wheatley was breaking literary barriers and making the world take notice.
In conclusion, Phyllis Wheatley broke barriers by taking a stand. She was persistent and never let being a slave get in the way of things. She stood up and was a risk taker for what some people died for. She was just happy to be in the moment, and her poetry was a whole new world. The same year, October 18th, 1775, she was freed by not only the deaths of her masters, but the power of her poetry. Later in life, she married John Peters, but all three of her children died while giving birth. Struggling to write poetry, she gave in with these last words: "Enlarge the close-contacted mind and fill it with thy fire." And with that, she died December 5th, 1784. On October 5th, 2003, a monument was made in honor of her and the impact she made. And even today, books, businesses, and even schools were made for the legacy she left. We know that the legacy she left was very influential to young black women, people, and of course on the world. And we know no one can live up to this reputation, but she truly lit the light in my dark tunnel.